Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of Charlie.inkspired. How are you guys doing? It's the middle of February, which is probably a good time to check in with you. It's that weird limbo phase in the UK where one week it's -5 degrees and the next week it's like 12 degrees and sunny, and it feels like we're in spring, so it's very confusing for the mental health. But we are very nearly in daylight saving hours, so rest assured, the sun is coming, just slowly. Today I've got one of my very sleepy kittens down beside me, so he may make an appearance in this week's video, we will find out. And if you can hear him snoring, I'm sorry. It's been a bit of a week for me personally, a lot of family stuff going on. I'm a primary carer in my family, which means I'm a busy gal, but I do it over and over, again and again in a heartbeat to make sure that my family know that they're loved. But it does mean that I'm very busy. I've literally spent all day caring and visiting loved ones in hospital, but I'm here looking like this. The grind never stops. True crime has to be discovered, so bear with me today. First and foremost, I have to point out that the day this video is released is the 16th of February 2024, which means my new single Hush Hush has been released today. So I will link the music video and the Spotify link down below. So please, please, please make sure you go and check it out, comment what you think, and a gold star for you if you even share it on your own socials, because it costs nothing and it really helps musicians out just to spread the word. And if you want a double gold star, you can tag me while you're sharing it and I will repost and say thank you and reach out to, be grateful. It's actually one of my most vulnerable songs that I've ever released, which is saying something for me. And it's about, frankly, it's about being a woman. You know how we're gaslit by medical professionals quite often for our pain being in our head or we're being hysterical, and the way that society often blames female victims for the trauma that they are exposed to at the hand of men. So it's a heavy watch, the music video. I won't lie to you, it is a heavy watch. And frankly, I'm pretty terrified about the reaction on this one, but if you go over that and spread some love, that would mean the world to me. Thank you. As always, I want to say thank you for all the love on last week's episode. It was a very heavy case. We covered a lot of political topics, and I really appreciate you taking time to listen to my opinions and educate ourselves on this journey. And thank you even more so for returning to join me on this dark, twisted journey. And bear with me, I am still finding my feet on everything. The colour grading was still off on last week's video. There were still some audio issues, although people have commented that audio was better last week, which I appreciate, I acknowledge. However, there were audio issues my end with the intro track by Simon Pitt. So I fixed that. I worked really hard because it didn't do him justice. So this week will be better, and make sure you go check his music out. I've linked his website down below. There are so many adverts, short movies, documentaries, everything that he's done that you'll recognise and be like, oh my god, this dude's a legend. So I will link that down below as well. Eventually I will get higher quality equipment like a camera, a higher quality microphone specifically for podcasting. And eventually that will mean that it won't be an issue for me to edit. Like I'll just be able to upload it and it will be pretty much ready to go. So the more you like, share, comment, all of that lovely stuff, the sooner I'll be able to do that. But in the meantime, you're going to have to bear with me. And before we jump into today's episode, I'm going to give you a very quick disclaimer. I mean, no harm nor disrespect to anyone involved in this case. These episodes are researched by myself and myself only with the information that is already available online. In my videos, I do share my opinions on cases and the political topics that it brings us across. So keep it in mind that if you hear an opinion that you don't agree with, that's absolutely fine. You're entitled to disagree, however, respect that that's my opinion and my opinion alone. As you are allowed yours, I am also allowed mine. And lastly, today's case covers topics of sexual assault and violence and murder. So if you're not in the headspace for that today, that's absolutely fine. But please make sure you pause here, don't go any further, look after yourself and come back at a time when you are in a better place to do so. So with all that being said, let's take a breath. Okay, we're ready to begin. And today we are covering the case of Libby Squire. Libby was born on the 1st of January in 1998. She was the firstborn to her mother Lisa and her father Russell. Her friends described her as fun, talented, witty, and she was a caring big sister to her 2 sisters and brother, who she always put above herself. And from a young age, Libby was always ambitious, and her parents said that she always held herself to such an impossibly high standard. And because of this high standard that she held herself against, by the time she was in A-levels, this started to affect her mental health. Libby developed an eating disorder and began self-harming because A-levels was a lot. It's intense. But with the help of her family, she pushed through and she got the results that she needed to get into uni. Pause there just to say, well done, Libby, because A-levels is one of the hardest things I've personally ever had to do, which is ridiculous because we've all got trauma going on in our lives. Like, we've all got worse things that have happened to us than education. But like, honestly, A-levels nearly destroyed me, like absolutely destroyed my mental health. So I really, really resonated with Libby's story when researching this. But enough about that, back onto the story. And Libby managed to get into Hull University, home to over 14,000 students. And her mum Lisa was so incredibly proud of her for getting into this uni, but that doesn't mean that she wasn't worried. Worried about her being away from home, worried about her mental health, just being a mum and worrying, because that's exactly what mothers do. Like, as much as my mum was ready for me to leave the house, she was also still worried, like, am I going to make it in the world? Because it's scary. And I imagine it must be really terrifying for your parents because you know what's about to hit them. So Libby attended the University of Hull, where she studied philosophy. And she began really thriving at uni. Not only was she intelligent, she was doing really well in her studies, and she was so loved and just enjoying the student lifestyle, And even within her first year, she knew that she wanted to go into journalism and travel the world with her housemates. And her loved ones said that she actually grew in confidence and just became so happy and so herself. Libby was also in a very happy, committed relationship with her boyfriend, Connor. Connor described Libby as caring, empathetic, and he said that from the moment they met, he knew that she was the one, even at a young age. Now, like I said, Libby was absolutely thriving at uni, loving every second of it. And part of being a uni student in the UK are the nights out, let's be honest. Because that's what it's about in your early 20s. You have fun with your friends, you go out, you find yourself, you party, you make some mistakes. That's part of growing up, right? So on Thursday, the 31st of January 2019, despite it being bitterly cold and snowing, this night was no different. So Libby and some friends had arranged to go to a friend's house for pre-drinks. They left their house at 8:30 p.m. on Wellesley Avenue, and Libby texted her boyfriend at this time to let him know that she was heading out. They stayed there for a while, they drank, they partied, they played games, chatted, hung out, and then they decided to go out to hit the clubs. So around 10 p.m, they left to go to the club called The Welly, and the group can be seen on CCTV queuing up outside this club. On this footage, you can clearly see that Libby was already quite intoxicated at this point. We've all done it. At the pre-drinks, we've hit it a little bit too hard. She was kind of stumbling around, struggling to stand still, and because of this, she was actually refused entry at the club for already being too intoxicated. And her friends, wanting to make sure she got home safe, but also not wanting to give up their night off because someone got too drunk, they put her in a taxi, gave the address, and watched the taxi drive off, where someone was back at the house waiting for her. The friends continued with their night out, and at around 4 a.m, when they were on their way home, they messaged their friend who was at the house to ask how Libby was getting on. But this is where they found out the horrifying news that Libby never returned home that night. And credit where credit is due, Libby's friends immediately hit the town, searching everywhere for Libby. They assumed that she carried on clubbing or she went to a friend's house. And you can see this on CCTV. They're knocking on people's doors, they're wandering around, they're on their phone, frantically searching for anywhere that she could be. They really, really wanted to find her, but nobody had seen or heard from Libby. Because back at their house, Libby had left her phone and her house keys were also found in the garden. So her friends became instantly worried and they rang the police. Immediately, police were concerned because, like I said earlier, it was a freezing night. There was snow on the floor. Their thoughts initially went to mental health. Had things got tough again for Libby and she didn't want to tell anyone, so she just ran away to deal with it. But Libby's friends and family were absolutely adamant that this was not the case. Libby was in the best place mentally since joining uni and she was thriving, so this was not going to be a case of she's run away because she wasn't having a good time. And she hadn't said anything to anyone about struggling either, which also was unlike her. If she was struggling, she would have said to someone. The media went viral with reports of a 21-year-old missing from a university town, and this story was blasted everywhere. And this is one of those cases where CCTV gives us like a literal play-by-play story of what happened. And without this CCTV, we would have never been able to piece together the truth of what happened that night. First and foremost, the police contacted the taxi firm that Libby got into when she left the club. After all, the driver was the last person Libby was seen with, and they actually spoke to the exact driver that dropped Libby off. He confirmed that he dropped Libby at the end of her road, and he watched her walk up to her front door. And this was proved on CCTV. You can see him drive off after Libby's got out the car. So he was kind of cleared of that. And at 11:37 p.m. on CCTV, you can see Libby turning the corner outside of her road. So she walks out of Wellesley Avenue and she's then walking onto Holworth Street. And this was a busy main road. And at 11:40 p.m, 2 passers-by actually stopped to see if Libby needs some help. They've seen an alone, vulnerable woman walking the streets at night, and they asked to see if she's okay, but Libby says she doesn't need any help. And the passers-by actually said she was a bit incoherent, she wasn't making much sense, could she have been intoxicated, was she upset? But police were concerned that this was less alcohol and actually could be early stages of hypothermia. Because remember, it was snowing, it was freezing, and Libby was dressed for a night out, as we all did as students. So she was probably freezing at this point. On this road, she also passed a fellow student's house where they invited her in, offered her to warm up and stay, but she just carried on walking. And it's sad in this case that there are multiple genuine people who tried to help her. Like, they spotted a vulnerable woman and they wanted to help her and make sure she was okay. Because it really seemed like this town just was full of uni students just looking out for each other. And I think that's really important to note. The next morning, after news got out that Libby was missing, hundreds of students gathered at Hull Uni to group together and search for Libby, which just shows testament to her character and how truly loved she was by everyone. Humberside Police then released a statement to say anyone driving around in the area between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. with any dashcam footage or who had seen anything to please come forward. Because when they released this statement, 3 days after her disappearance, at this point in time, it was still being treated as a missing persons case. Libby's phone was also searched by police after it was discovered at her house, but there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that she was meeting someone after she came home from the club that night. No messages, no phone calls exchanged, nothing. So they started to wonder, was this less of a missing persons case and more of an abduction? Libby's parents, Lisa and Russell, also made multiple public announcements about Libby's disappearance. And her mother even tearfully said, "Libby, my darling pie, we just want to know that you're safe. Please get in touch with us any way that you can. The whole family is missing you. I miss you so much. It's breaking my heart not knowing where you are." And it just was so clear that they just wanted to know where she was. They just wanted to know that she was safe, and they just wanted her home. She was so loved by her family and friends and everyone around her. And this is further proved by the fact that the University of Hull and all the students within it grouped together with the police to do multiple search parties in the local area. They searched the streets, open fields, everything they could think of. The whole town was searched completely top to bottom, and police actually ended up going down Wellesley Road, Holworth Road, and searching everyone's bins to see if there was any piece of evidence that had been chucked away. But nothing. Not a single shred of Libby or any evidence was found in this search. And the case was growing more infamous day by day, and this was Humberside's biggest missing persons case yet. Finally, a tip came in from a member of public. A local resident who lived on Oak Road's playing field told the police he was fast asleep on the night of Libby's disappearance. But at 12:15 a.m, he was woken to the sound of a woman screaming so loudly the other side of the playing field in the woods. He said he got up to the window to look to see what was happening. All he saw was a man running towards his parked car. So police have a lead, and they immediately check the CCTV at Oak Road's playing field at around 12:15 a.m. and work backwards. And this is where they spotted a silver Vauxhall Astra circling the local area for hours on end prior. And it goes around and around the same area with no obvious purpose. The body language of the car didn't look like it was lost or, looking for a parking space. It was just aimlessly driving around. And what does that remind you of, guys? Similarly to the Sarah Everard case where Wayne Couzens is just circling the area, whoever this was looking for a victim. And again, this just screams premeditated, not against a specific person. Whoever the perpetrator was just hunting for a victim vulnerable enough to, be picked, I guess you could say. And just before midnight, this car is seen pulling up on Holworth Road. And at this point on CCTV, you can see Libby walking back towards the way she came from on Holworth Road. So seemingly it looked like she was making her way home. But on CCTV, police saw this man get out of his vehicle and walk in the same direction on Holworth Road, but the other side of the road, and just a few feet behind. So he was watching where she was going. And on this CCTV, you see the most chilling thing I think I've seen on CCTV in a while. You see him just stop and watch for a good 10 to 15 seconds. He just stops. Then all of a sudden he runs across the road towards her. And with what we go on to discover later, I think that this moment is absolutely vital. I genuinely think this is the moment where he is standing there assessing whether this is going to be his victim, whether she is vulnerable enough to not fight back. And you can almost see it. Whilst yes, it's very distant on the CCTV, you can kind of just see him look, watch, and then go, yeah, going for it, runs across the road. And 5 minutes later, the pair were seen talking on CCTV, and they were walking back in the opposite direction that they were just walking in, so they're now walking back away from Libby's house. And literally everything this pair does is caught on CCTV, and they walk towards his parked car, where Libby stands on the pavement. The driver opens the car, sits in the driver's seat with the door open, and they're just chatting for a while. We don't know what's being said, but it looks pretty calm at this point in time. And this is a busy road, cars are driving past, and you can kind of see him looking around, watching for when a car passes. And at 12:08 a.m, Libby was spotted getting into the vehicle, and shortly after the car drives off. This specific piece of footage was so vital. We now have a new person that Libby was last with when she was alive. And it was so coincidental that this was actually caught on CCTV. This wasn't like street CCTV that this was caught on. This was like a private camera, like it almost looks like it's between two brick walls, looking through a gate out onto the street. And if he'd have parked like a foot back, you just wouldn't have seen it at all. And on this footage, there isn't any obvious signs of a struggle or an altercation between the two. However, police later did find Libby's watch in this exact spot where the car was parked. So was it possible that there was an altercation? Maybe there was an altercation once they were in the car. Maybe he grabbed her wrist to try and guide her in. And we just don't know what was said then. Did he promise to give her a lift home? Did he promise to do other things? We will never know the conversation that went on and how he got her into the car. All we do know is that we have a time frame, we have a suspect, we have a vehicle, and we have a female scream coming from the woods at 12:15. So with all of that, we have a prime suspect. And it wasn't hard for the police to follow this car's journey. And 11 minutes past midnight, this car was spotted pulling into Oaks Road playing field. And just 5 minutes after that, we can see him running back to his car alone. And he immediately drives off into the streets. Now you may be thinking, surely someone's seen him. Someone's seen this car being weird all night, right? Well, you're absolutely right, but probably not in the way that you'd think or hope. This same night at around 3 a.m, 2 women were walking home from a night out, when all of a sudden, this man walked out in front of them and started masturbating. Understandably, these women were horrified, disgusted, and felt extremely violated. But they said to the officers it seemed that the more that they reacted to what he was doing, the more joy he got out of it. Which sadly is quite common with cases of public indecency or like sexual harassment of this nature, because that is something that they get off on, is the discomfort that it brings their victims. Now, luckily, these wonderful women were able to give a description of the man that night, including what he was wearing, which, lo and behold, no surprise, it matched exactly what the man on the CCTV was wearing when he was last with Libby. So seemingly, this man was just on a complete sexual rampage on the streets of Hull that night. So with everything that they have, police start tracking the car, and they're getting hit after hit on ANPR, and they're just watching this man's movements, studying what he's like, studying what he does in his day-to-day, and they're analysing everything about him. And on the 6th of February 2019, police announced that they've made an arrest in connection to Libby's disappearance. Where here, 24-year-old Pavel Relowich was arrested. He was arrested at his home address in connection to Libby's disappearance. His car was also recovered as part of the investigation. And whilst this is going on, police are searching everywhere in Oak Road's playing field, not just in the woods but also the surrounding lakes nearby. They literally have special marine units wading through the waters to try and find anything that was potentially discarded there. So who is Pavel? He was a married father of 2, and he worked in a butcher in Hull, 20 miles out from the centre. He moved to the UK from Poland as a teenager, and this arrest actually shocked everyone who knew him personally in life. From the outside, they saw a hard-working young father who did anything to support his young family. His neighbours said he always seemed polite, always said hello, and nobody would ever have expected him to be linked to this. But from what we already know so far, this was only the beginning of a very dark, twisted person. In fact, Pavel was linked to 7 to 9 other crimes, and he was connected by DNA evidence. These incidents had been taking place for over 2 years in the local area, with the latest offence taking place days before Libby's disappearance. Pavel was seen peering into windows, watching women as they slept, watching women as they were having sex with their partners. He was exposing himself to multiple women on the street, and he was even linked to multiple reports of break-ins to houses where the only thing that was stolen were women's underwear, and what was left behind were used condoms. Like, having your house broken into is an awful, awful thing. And, it's not what's taken, it's what's left behind that actually affects victims the most. But to have something that violating, that personal left in your home, I can't imagine how that must have made those victims feel. And it just goes to prove the sexual nature, the sexual drive that's behind every single crime that this man commits. And he's doing this in the local area. Pavel actually lived 3 minutes away from Oak Road's playing field. So you'd think if you were gonna do repetitive crimes of this nature, you'd go outside where you live so people don't recognise you on the street. No. Pavel actually looked into windows on the street that he lived on Horworth Road, the same street that Libby was last seen on CCTV. Like, it is absolutely mind-blowing how he wasn't recognised, as these crimes had multiple reports, multiple witnesses. People actually spotted him through the window, and they had DNA evidence connecting every single one of these together. But whilst they were able to connect them together, they had never had Pavel's DNA on file. So yes, they could say these were all linked, but if it's not matching with anything they have in their system, they don't know who that one person is. But all it takes is finding that match with one, and then you've got them all. And with all that in mind, it was only a matter of time before something like what happened to Libby happened. When murders of a sexual nature occur, there's usually a build-up that leads to them. They often have a long build-up with multiple victims prior. And you notice each incident becomes more frequent, more violent, and the risk becomes greater. Until eventually, stealing underwear through people's windows just doesn't cut it anymore for them. So then it goes up to, exposing yourself to people in the street. But then very quickly they get bored of that and they need more and more and more. And it eventually only leads to one thing, which is awful because you can see such a build-up and you can think there must have been so many times where someone could have intervened to try and stop this, right? Pavel later admits that he's addicted to hardcore pornography. And he would often lie to his wife that he was going out for an evening stroll when actually he was going to peer through people's windows, break into their houses to steal their underwear, or, expose himself on the street. And the evidence they found in his car only supported this. Like, we didn't need these words to come out of his mouth to know that he was doing this on a regular basis. In his car, they found multiple sex toys, underwear stolen from the victims' houses, photographs of women where they quite clearly weren't aware that the photographs were being taken of them, other stolen items from houses, and even used condoms again. Imagine that being your MO, used condoms. It's just so uncomfortable, so bizarre. I don't know. And on multiple of these items, that were stolen from houses or the sex toys that they found, had traces of his saliva and semen on them. And every part we go on to find out about this case just gets worse and worse, in my opinion. But it raises an important topic. This had been going on for 2 years, and Humberside police were able to connect all of these together, where they have multiple instances of one man patrolling the streets looking for vulnerable women, looking for open curtains, open windows, seeking an opportunity of students, young women. Do we know the level of extent that the public knew what was going on? Granted, these were probably reported in local newspapers. Was it revealed to the public that this was all connected by one man? Did the public start putting this together? Were students warned by the university that there was a man on the streets, particularly targeting young women? So please be careful on a night out. Make sure you're never alone. Make sure you're in groups. And this is something that the police have got stick about since this murder happened, because could they have done more to warn people? Could they have done more to protect the public? Surely there must have been some statement released, right? And there are multiple documentaries on this case. There are multiple videos, reports, articles, everything. And I looked at so many different places, and there's such differing opinions on this, whether it was everyone was aware in the town that, there was this predator on the loose targeting young women. But then others say that nobody had any idea that this was going on. And it's just really difficult because there's no particular evidence to suggest either way. Could there have been more done? Probably. With everything that we've researched so far, the answer is probably going to be yes. So back onto the story. Pavel is interviewed by police, and initially he cooperates. He says he did see Libby that night. He noticed her walking alone, and he approached her, offering her a lift home. He said he dropped her off at Oak Road's playing field, where he left her alone and just drove off. He insisted to the police that he was being a good citizen and making sure that she got home safely by car rather than walking the streets alone. He then proceeds to tell the police that he got home, had a bath, watched violent pornography and had a wank. Seems like a very odd thing to tell the police, to me. Didn't really need that bit in there. So yes, surprise, surprise, he's playing the innocent card. But what he's also done is place himself in the exact time and place that Libby was last seen. And whilst they didn't have much evidence connecting him to the disappearance of Libby, other than the CCTV, they had no hard, concrete evidence at all of him and Libby last being seen. What they did have was the evidence of all these previous sexual assaults, sexual harassment cases, break-ins, connecting him to these. They had DNA evidence, they'd got him. So they were actually able to arrest him for these multiple offences. But because there was no concrete evidence, there was no altercation seen, no argument in the streets with Libby, there wasn't enough evidence to connect him with the disappearance of Libby just yet. Because in the eyes of the court, all that we can tell from CCTV is that he did pick her up and he did drop her off. And it's so tricky because the prosecution has to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that he is responsible. And it just wasn't enough to go off yet. Without any evidence, without a body, all they've got are these images of him driving around in a car, and that's not a crime, right? But credit to the police here because they do arrest him for these previous offences immediately, which is a good thing because we know that whilst he's locked up for these previous offences, he's not out doing more, and police can actually start to investigate this a bit deeper, and they're not against a clock of trying to find someone who's on the run. And by August, 7 months after Libby's disappearance, Pavel actually went to court for these previous offences. He pleaded guilty to 9 counts in total, where he was charged with 4 counts of voyeurism, 2 counts of public indecency, and 3 counts of burglary. He was initially sentenced to 8.5 years, but this was reduced to 6 after a successful appeal. So, skipping back on the timeline, a long, painful 7 weeks after Libby's disappearance, with nothing more than CCTV to go off, until one day a fisherman found a body floating in the water near Humber Estuary. The damage to this body was extensive. The decomposition process had been going on for weeks now, and we know that water only accelerates this. But one thing that was very much still intact was a necklace around the body with the pendant with the letter L on it, which can be seen in multiple photos of Libby prior to her death. And with that, Libby's parents were informed that her body had been found, and a post-mortem was taking place at this time to determine the cause of death. And the post-mortem results didn't take long to come back. It was confirmed quite quickly that Libby had been raped before her death. But that's pretty much most of the information they could obtain. The body was so drastically decomposed that it wasn't actually possible for them to determine an exact cause of death. But the likeliness was it was either asphyxiation or drowning, which means we have absolutely no idea whether Libby was alive or not before her body was put into the water. The closest description they can provide is compression of the neck or covering of the mouth for asphyxiation. And since this discovery, Libby's mum Lisa actually revealed that Libby was terrified of water, and she wasn't a strong swimmer. So it seemed that even if she was alive when her body went into the water, she didn't have much of a chance. And there was no way that he could have known that either. Like, it just so happened to be that this was the place that her body was put. And we can only imagine how terrified she was in that moment. And in 2022, Lisa actually requested to meet Pavel just to get some more information to find out whether her daughter was alive when she went into the water. She wanted answers because I imagine as a parent who has to go through a child being murdered, you're going to want to know every detail. Otherwise, your mind's going to start placing those details for you. And initially, Pavel agreed to meet Lisa and chat to her. She stated to the papers that nothing he could tell me could be worse than what my imagination is already making up. Frustratingly, Pavel retracted this agreement to meet her. He was scared he was going to be painted in a bad light by the Squire family. Just a little note to Pavel here. If anyone was going to paint you in a bad light, you're doing a good job of that yourself. Okay? Brilliant. Glad we've got that covered. So back to the timeline. Pavel is already in prison for his prior offences. And meanwhile, police are still searching for concrete evidence to link him to this. One thing they were able to find was that Pavel returned to Oakwoods playing field around 2 a.m. So why would he return to this place where he dropped a girl off 2 hours prior? Had he forgotten to conceal something? And granted, this wasn't evidence of anything in particular, but it does link on to something that the defence actually tried to bring up later. However, one undeniable piece of evidence that was found was Pavel's DNA on and inside of Libby. And with this, police were able to put forward a case with the evidence in hopes of charging him with Libby's murder. And with this newfound evidence, Pavel had to change his story. Here he told the police that Libby absolutely threw herself on him and they had consensual sex prior to dropping her off to the woods. So 2 weeks after Libby's funeral, Pavel was charged with the murder of Libby Squire. And you can watch this footage of him being charged online. He's in the back of a police car being read his rights, being read, what he's being arrested for. And he's just sat there laughing and smirking. And we don't know why he's doing this. Is it because he's getting some weird kick out of it? Is it like a, I've been caught? Or does he just frankly not give a shit? Does he find this funny? I don't know. And listen, everyone reacts differently in this scenario. We will never know what is a right or wrong way to react to this because people grieve differently. People take news, shocking news, completely differently to everyone else. But I just can't picture myself in any scenario, whether I'm guilty or not, laughing and smirking whilst being charged with murder. And in January, the trial began. And Pavel had nowhere to run. And if it hadn't been for these earlier crimes that he was linked to, we wouldn't have been able to piece together his violent sexual nature. But with all of this and all of the evidence connecting in between them all, it shows the pattern and an increase in risk as time goes and everything escalates. So it was only a matter of time before Pavel did something like this. And sadly, it just so happened to be that Libby was in the right place at the wrong time. Because Libby met his MO. She was alone and she was vulnerable. And the defence really tried to focus on the fact that there was only a 10-minute window from him picking her up in his car to arriving at the woods, and then to the scream being heard. So yes, that is a small window. But given the fact that Libby was intoxicated and barely able to stand, the reality of it was she probably wasn't able to fight back. So it was probably quite easy for him to overpower her. And with what we know of him returning to the scene later on, that would suggest that he got rid of any evidence there. Did he, go back to put her body in the water then? We don't know. During this trial, Pavel told the court that he was looking for a woman to have easy sex with. The jury at Sheffield Crown Court was made very aware that Pavel had been convicted of 9 sexual offences prior, carried out between July 2017 and January 2019. The night he came across Libby, Pavel admitted that he was looking to commit a similar offence, and he said that he parked on Holworth Road with the intention of looking through some windows and maybe exposing himself to someone. So here it was revealed to the court that Pavel was prowling the streets hunting for a victim, and he was in a state of heightened sexual arousal, where he was just searching for someone vulnerable. And during the investigation, we know that the police found pretty much everything connecting to all of these crimes in his car, but they didn't find much in his house. In fact, the only thing they did find in his house was a map of all the student houses in Hull. And if that doesn't scream dangerous man, I don't know what will. During questioning, the barrister of defence, Oliver Saxby, questioned Pavel, and he asked, "Do you accept that you have a problem?" He said that it was difficult for him to accept because he was scared that his wife was going to leave him and take the children away. And this is exactly what she did. His wife divorced him and left for Poland with the 2 children. She released a statement after saying that she was shocked and horrified and that their relationship was nothing of the sort and he was only ever respectful and kind to her. She said that this was not the man she knew. But she didn't stick by him. She left. She was completely out of there for the safety of her and her own children. And that's often a part of these cases that goes quite unspoken, is the family that's left behind on both sides. How must the wife feel knowing that she was married to this man, she raised children with this man, she slept next to this man every night with no idea of what he was doing or no idea of what he was capable of? It just truly must have been horrifying for everyone involved in this. The trial went on for 2 weeks, including 6 days of deliberations. 11 jurors decided that Pavel was guilty of both counts of murder and rape. Pavel was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years. The judge called the case unimaginatively horrifying and stated that in the unlikely event that Pavel is ever released, he will be watched closely for the rest of his life. And in October 2019, almost 300 people gathered for Libby's funeral, which again truly shows us how wonderful of a human she was, how much she was loved and cared for by her family, friends, and community around her. And that is the case of Libby Squire. And since her daughter's horrific murder, Libby's mum Lisa has been working really hard to make changes around the law, and specifically changes to sentences to murder. She protests that sentences in relation to murder should come with an automatic life sentence to represent the life that they have taken away from someone else. With this, she's also fighting for heavier sentences for non-contact sexual violence. And shout out to Lisa massively on this case. I can't imagine the pain, the heartbreak that this puts her through on a daily basis still to this day. But to use this experience to turn something good into the world, to fight for other people, to have more protection, to fight for the justice system in this country. Just brava, Lisa, absolutely brava. And we are behind you every step of the way. I fully agree with what you are fighting for. So there we go, guys. Let's take a deep breath. That was the case of Libby Squire, and it's a horrific one. It's really intense, it's really heavy. There's a lot of avenues that it takes us down, but yeah, there we have it. We've truly investigated that one. So make sure you go do something good for yourself today and drink your water, because it's probably been a while since you did that. Listen, I'm not one to talk. I also really need to drink water. I actually am severely dehydrated on quite a regular basis, but I am going to remind you every chance I can, because you're a little plant that needs to grow, and the only way to grow is to, give yourself the nutrients that you need. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this really, really dark story today. Make sure you guys subscribe by clicking that button or clicking the subscribe button down below to make sure you never miss another case from me. Comment below which case you want me to cover next. We've done a lot of UK cases so far, so maybe we need to venture outside of the UK. Tell me what you want me to do and I will look into it and I'll do my best to do it. But to find out whether we're going to cover a case abroad, you're going to have to stick around. So with that, stay safe, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.